Ted, welcome to our podium.
Thanks. I can just about reach it. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see a good group here. I have to commend everybody for showing up on a Saturday morning to listen to speakers. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been invited. So I want to thank Tristan and particularly Janice Fiumengo for inviting me. And I have been writing articles. I've had many conversations with Janice and my friend Dave Soloway, who will speak later on. And I guess they've heard me rant and rail on some of the topics that have come up this morning. And I was challenged to, put up or shut up, so I had to write some articles, which Janice did a fantastic job of editing for me. I'm not, I am an engineer, as Tristan mentioned, and I have many other interests. And this is not sort of my natural inclination to be out here speaking to people. I guess the engineering side of me wants to do things and to build things and to see things work. But I have been I call myself a political junkie. I've always been interested in political affairs, current events, social, and sort of what's going on in the world. And over the last, I have to say, 40 years, the view I have of the world has changed so dramatically. And I guess that's a natural process of maturing and growing up. But we live now in times that are so inverted or perverted. I mean, wake up in the morning and read the news or watch television, you can't help but feel like you're in Alice in Wonderland somewhere. We were in a crazy time. Things are going on. Just as an example, I mean, we listen to things. Last night I was on television, mention of Justin Trudeau. He was asked who you admire as which regime or which leaders do you admire, and the first thing that came to his lips was he admires China because of their dictatorship. They can get things done. So I mean, if that doesn't drive you crazy like it drives me crazy, I don't know what does. I'll give you a little bit of background on why I'm here and how this whole transition took place. I'm a lot older than I look. I mean, I know you. In 1967, I was a young engineer. I just graduated from McGill, and my first full-time job was at Boeing in Seattle. And so I went out to Seattle and worked. I was fortunate to get to work on the Supersonic Transport Project, which was America's SST, like the Concorde. The SST was never built because I started in '67. And in '69, one day one of our fifth level boss came in and basically told everybody the project had been shut down, and tens of thousands of people were laid off. And in fact, when I first started at Boeing in '67, there was 110,000 people. By '69, it was down to 35,000. By '71 or '72, it was down to 28,000 people. So the city of Seattle suffered 80,000 people layoff. And that's a city of 1 million. Each person also represented a family. So we're talking about a third of the city were directly affected by the layoffs. And there was 35% unemployment rate at that time. And the streets were filled with, and there's the anti-war protests. So every month there'd be, the freeways would be jam-packed with hundreds of thousands of people protesting. It was a very volatile time. Now the reason a lot of other projects were cancelled. In fact, the whole aerospace industry was decimated right up and down the coast, right down in California. The reason this SST was shut down was because the environmental group, the environmental lobby, claimed that sonic booms would cause major destruction. So that was really my first sort of personal experience with what I now know to be a very radical ideology. When I was laid off for Boeing, it landed me, I had been taking courses towards a master's in engineering, and so I ended up going to the university, back to the University of Washington. And Seattle was, at that time, I guess it might still be, it was kind of the mustering point for troops going to and from Vietnam. And a lot of the returning soldiers were coming back, and a lot of the caskets were coming back. So it was a very active and very emotional time. And the whole city was kind of aware of what was going on. The University of Washington was a hotbed of radical activity. That's where all of the local leaders who were the Students for Democratic Society and the Seattle Liberation Front, and I just had my master's project to do, and there was no job, so I took it very leisurely, and I hung around in the common rooms and met a lot of the people, and so I knew a lot of these people. And among the day-to-day conversation, we talked about all these Students for Democratic Society, Angela Davis, the Black Panthers, this Chicago 8, Chicago 7. Some of you may remember some of this. I'm sure most of you have at least heard of these. And some of the names that were kicked around, really as sort of, the leaders of that time, were people like Bernardine Dohrn or Bill Ayers. Now this was 1969, 1970. I knew these people, I knew who they were, I knew what they were doing, and I kind of knew where they were in the spectrum of ideology and leftist protest. And at that time, I guess I would have been I considered myself on the left. Although being a Canadian, I was somewhat in a protected. I knew I could always leave. Although I was draft eligible for a short time, I knew I could always leave. So I was really more of an observer of what was going on, and it was part of a much larger cultural context. It was all part of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and politics fitted in there. So I was interested in the whole milieu, the whole environment at the time, not necessarily specifically the politics, but it was anyway. I got my degree. I went back to Canada, which I call Sleepy Hollow. We used to drive up to Vancouver just to be able to see people smiling. I mean, the city of Seattle was so intense. Those were such intense days that I remember driving up to Vancouver and saying, people are actually smiling and they're not thinking about politics. They're not, protesting and railing about this stuff. Anyway, went back to Canada and went on, had a fairly diverse career. I worked in government for a while as a curator of Museum of Science and Technology of the computer division, and then later I went for my own business, multimedia production company. So I got into the private sector, and then later than that I was a consultant to government. And in fact, one of my feeling of pride is that because of my expertise, I was often called in to solve problems that before they hit the news. There was one department, some of you may remember a project called, it was a scandal called, what was it called? Shovelgate. Human Resources Development Canada inadvertently lost $1 billion. The auditors had come in to look for, to do an audit. There were some rumors of things going on, and they couldn't track down $1 billion out of 60 billion. Not a lot, but it was sort of somewhat significant. And I was one of the people they brought in to kind of fix the problem. And often the problem is just pure inefficiency and ignorance, and that's a whole other subject. But I had a very privileged behind-the-scenes view. I worked on many different projects, very similar. Basically, as a fixer, and eventually I ended up doing similar things in Australia, and eventually in Hong Kong for the People's Republic of China project that was done by a university. It was Hong Kong Polytechnic. They were supposed to do a study on education for People's Republic of China for the Politburo, and they just didn't know how to do it. And I came in, and so I understand bureaucracy, I understand inefficiency, I understand expertise, and so I'm here because my own personal experience has led me to have to speak. And I mentioned, go back to Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn. When Obama first started running, I was curious, of course, to see what was going on, and I started to read about him. And then I found out that he had his career was launched in the home of Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn. By the way, does everybody here know who I'm talking about, Bernardine Doran? If you haven't heard of Bill Ayers, please put up your hands. Okay, so Bill Ayers was one of the heads of the Weather Underground, which was the domestic terrorist organization. They would be the furthest left, most radical left group in America. They did bomb some buildings, people were killed. Bernardine Doran ended up going to jail. Bill Ayers didn't, on a technicality. Just as a matter of note, another one of their partners was a guy named Jeff Jones, and he was a guy who actually headed up a group, the Paull project, that wrote the American stimulus bill when Obama got in. So we're talking about some of the most radical leftist, I can use all kinds of Marxist, statist. I'll talk a little bit about more of that later on. But as soon as I realized that Ayers and Doran were in the picture, and the other thing I heard was that Obama was a disciple. He'd studied Saul Alinsky. Anybody not hear of Saul Alinsky? If you haven't heard the name Alinsky, put up your hand. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about him. Saul Alinsky was I guess he'd be called the godfather of the left. He's the premier strategist of how to overthrow society, how to... the Weather Underground were a violence group, and they used bombs and terrorism. Alinsky said, no, the way to do it is by getting into the system. You burrow into the system and take over from the inside. And so he developed a whole strategy he wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. He cut his teeth in Chicago in the 20s and 30s. He was a radical, I guess he would be a union organizer. And in those days, the stockyards, the docks were controlled by the mafia. So we had the left wing, the unionists, who were really in bed with the mafia, using a lot of the same tactics to control different domains. So Alinsky had he took all of his knowledge and his experience, and he wrote these rules. And among them, again, I won't go into that, but among them were, first of all, any means necessary. So the end justifies the means. So these are people, we're talking about a mentality that absolutely believes that they're right, and it doesn't matter what you have to do to impose that regime and to take over and to overthrow the power structure. So as soon as I learned about Obama's background, I started to really study much more carefully. And it took a few years to sort of join the dots and to see what is really going on. And so this series that I'm writing for Freedom Press is essentially trying to take as much of that information that I've compiled, and to many of you this will be preaching to the converted, but some of you maybe aren't that familiar. But to look at what I realize is that most people just don't have the time, the energy, the inclination. I mean, people work and they come home and you're tired and you watch a bit of TV, and if unless you're watching Fox or Sun in Canada, you're just not going to get the information. And if you do use the internet, this internet is, fortunately we have the internet, we have wonderful websites and blogs, but we're still a minority, and unless you know where to go, unless you have somebody who can sort of direct you to it, most people just can't afford to take 10 years or 5 years, or I literally spend 3 to 4 hours a day keeping up with what's going on. And I suspect that most people don't even have, if you have 30 to 40 minutes or 3 to 4 minutes a day, it's a lot. So again, being an engineer, I want to take as much of this information and put it into useful form. So that's a little bit about what I want to talk about. I'm only going to be able to scratch the surface of it. Is there anybody who doubts that I'll just back up. I call this, I'll say confessions of a conservative cultural warrior. The term warrior is a pretty powerful word. Is there anybody who doubts that we're actually in a battle? If you think we're not, then it's just, all right, I guess you're all here because you're concerned, right? I mean, you wouldn't be here if you weren't really concerned. So the question is, and you can keep studying this stuff, you can learn, and every day you can learn about more travesties, but what is it that we can do? So what I want to lay out here today is just kind of an overview of the strategy that I think will take us forward, and we are a minority, but we do have we have a very valid case to make, and we have 5 more minutes. Okay, I'm going to look through. All right, so this is the first point I want to make, is that I told you my story. I'm here because of a commitment, because I have a passion. I'd much rather not be here, but if I know something and I don't do something about it, then why would anybody else? So the first thing is to find your own reason. I think you have to dig into your own experience, into your own life, and find out what it is that affects you directly. Again, in my case, I feel I was born in probably the best time in history ever to be born. I was born just after World War II, when there was this liberated feeling. You know, my parents and my parents' grandparents' generation had just come through the Depression. They wanted to give their children something better, and all the energy and resources that were liberated after the war. We were the freest society ever. During the 60s and 70s, you know, anything went, right? The whole culture, and this is where the culture came in. The whole culture changed, and a lot of those attitudes, a lot of the people who were, you know, my peers, I guess, they took a lot of the liberation of the culture into their own life, but they forgot about the responsibility. And unless those two go hand in hand, we are in deep trouble. So the first thing is to just find your passion. I'll just put a quick analogy on information. Was it Coleridge, the poem, "To water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink"? Here we're in the ironic situation of having this incredible internet with hundreds of thousands, millions of websites, so much information. But the vast majority of people have no idea how to go there. It's like when you look at the stars at night, and people go out and look at the sky. If you live in the city, you may not even see their stars. But if you do see the stars, you see kind of this amorphous mass. You may recognize a few, you know, Orion or the Big Dipper or something. But somebody who's studied astronomy will be able to see the entire ecliptic, all the astrological signs. But then there's another level beyond that, would be the navigator, who can take that information and actually, you know, if you're out on the ocean, it's a matter of survival, knowing where to go, or being able to read the charts, and you see what's going on the surface of the ocean, but what's going on underneath. So that's sort of my approach, is to look at all of everything that's going on, to try and put it into some kind of context. One more minute, okay? I thought I would have trouble filling 5 minutes, so we can talk about more of this. All right, let me just summarize then. What is it that we can do personally? Again, my own experience. My wife and I, Margaret, we decided when we kind of realized that we've got to do something. First thing, we live in a conservative riding in the Thousand Islands, and so we went to a riding meeting. We met our MP. We know our MPP. We contribute a little bit to them. I put signs up for them, just to be around them, just to be in among the people. If you're going to have any influence, then you want to be among the people who have the power to actually make change. So I encourage you to do all of that. Here in Ontario, most people from Ontario, while we have a conservative federal government, how long it may last, I don't know, but we have a liberal government here that is following right in the footsteps. They're using exactly the same strategies that they're watching Obama, watching the left. And so I just encourage you, again, I can probably spend a whole weekend on developing this, but I encourage you to get very involved, talk to your neighbors, don't be afraid of being politically correct. But be prepared to be hated, insulted, and slandered, and slurred. So, time out. Thank you.